April 1943, 25,000 feet above the Solomon Sea. The Pacific sky looks calm from a distance, perfect blue, streaked with slow-moving clouds. But inside the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning, nothing is calm. The throttles are forward. The twin Allison engines scream in unison, counter-rotating props cutting the air with brutal precision. The pilot, Lieutenant Rex Barber, scans the horizon, sweat freezing against his oxygen mask. His fuel gauges twitch. His radio crackles with static. Somewhere ahead, contact. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, estimate 2 dozen. Through the glare, silver arcs appear, slicing down from the sun. Japanese A6M Zeros, sunlight flashing off their rounded wings. Fast, graceful, and closing. Barber's squadron leader, Tom Lanphier, calls it lightning flight, break, boom, and zoom. The P-38s split formation. 2 climb, 2 dive. The Zeros follow, light and agile, rolling into tight turns, their pilots confident. They've done this before. Against Wildcats, against P-40s, always with the same result. But the Lightnings aren't turning. They're vanishing. Barber dives through the cloud layer, throttles open, airspeed building past 400 mi Bougainville. The airframe shakes. The sky blurs. Behind him, the Zero that tried to follow begins to vibrate violently. Its wings can't take the pressure. It tumbles, snapping apart mid-air, a white blossom of debris and vapor. Barber pulls up, levels out, and climbs hard. His instruments flicker. He's burning fuel faster than he wants to, but he's still alive. Above him, the fight disintegrates into chaos. P-38s slash through Zero formations at twice their speed. The old rules, turn tighter, climb faster, strike first, no longer apply. Every Lightning moves like a scalpel, hitting, diving, disappearing. On the radio, voices blur, "Splash 1-0, another gone. He's smoking, brake left." In less than 4 minutes, the sky changes sides. The once untouchable Zero, symbol of Japanese air supremacy, is now prey. For nearly 2 years, its agility had made it a legend. Pilots across the Pacific whispered about it like a ghost. Impossible to catch, impossible to beat. But here, over Bougainville, the ghost meets its physics. The Lightning can't turn tighter. But it doesn't have to. It climbs higher, dives faster, hits harder. Every time the Zero tries to pull into a turning fight, the P-38 drops away in a vertical dive, impossible to follow. Every time it tries to climb, it's too slow. The duel that once defined the Pacific, agility versus instinct, has evolved into something else entirely. Energy, altitude, and speed. Barber's altimeter spins upward. He levels off at 30,000 feet, surveys the chaos below. Tiny spirals of flame twisting down into the sea. He can't hear the explosions, just the hum of his engines. "Bandits, breaking off," his radio crackles. "They're diving away." He exhales, long and shaky. The mission isn't over. It's barely begun. But something irreversible has happened in those few minutes of air combat. For the first time in the Pacific War, the Americans aren't surviving. They're dominating. Barber's lightning banks west, sunlight flaring off its long twin booms. The clouds part beneath him, revealing the endless green of Bougainville's jungles and the blue of the ocean beyond. The Zero, once the master of the Pacific sky, is dying in the place it was born to rule. And the reason is simple. Speed. Pure, merciless speed. Because war doesn't honor myth. It obeys math. And in 1943, the math has shifted. In 1942, the world believed the Japanese Zero was untouchable. It wasn't just a fighter, it was a myth with wings. Allied pilots called it the sky's ghost. Newspapers called it the samurai plane. In the first months of the Pacific War, the Zero carved a legend in blood. Over Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies, it shredded Allied squadrons like paper. American and British fighters, Wildcats, P-40s, Buffaloes, couldn't match its turn rate or climb. Entire units vanished in hours. Pilots came home talking about superhuman agility. Commanders wrote reports claiming the Zero could climb vertically forever, turn on a dime, and shrug off punishment. Rumors spread that its wings were made from secret alloys. Others said its pilots had supernatural reflexes. The myth of the Zero wasn't born from propaganda. It was born from fear. But every myth hides a trade-off, and the Zero's secret wasn't divine. It was dangerous. To make the A6M Zero light enough to perform miracles, its designer, Jiro Horikoshi, stripped it of nearly everything that kept a pilot alive. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no bulletproof glass. Even the aluminum used in its frame was thin to the edge of failure. The result was astonishing agility and terrifying fragility. It wasn't that the Zero turned better by magic. It turned better because it was willing to die doing it. In the first year of the war, that design philosophy fit Japan's vision. The Imperial Navy prized initiative and courage above all else. The aircraft didn't have to survive, only to win. The nation built planes like it trained its pilots, for decisive duels, not prolonged wars. That worked until the duels ran out. By mid-1942, the Americans had studied the Zero's weaknesses through captured wrecks and pilot testimonies. They learned the truth. The Zero's light frame stalled under high G-forces, its roll rate collapsed at high speeds, and its unprotected fuel tanks turned every hit into an inferno. The myth began to crack, but habits die hard. Even after Midway, American commanders still trained pilots to fight the Zero on its own terms, turning with it, chasing it in circles. They were still playing by the rules the Zero had written. Then came the lightning. When Lockheed's P-38 entered Pacific combat in late 1942, the old rulebook burned. Its twin engines meant it could dive faster than any single prop plane in the theater. Its turbo superchargers allowed it to climb where the Zero suffocated. Its concentrated nose-mounted guns, one 20mm cannon and four 50 caliber machine guns, could tear a Zero apart in half a second. But the Lightning's real weapon wasn't its firepower. It was its refusal to play fair. American pilots learned quickly. Never turn with a Zero. Hit, climb, dive, and hit again. The Zero lived by agility. The Lightning lived by velocity. The Japanese called this new tactic boom and zoom. They hated it because they couldn't stop it. Their once invincible fighter, designed for a world of chivalric air duels, had met an enemy that fought with cold precision and mechanical logic. To the Japanese, it felt dishonorable. To the Americans, it felt effective. This was the cultural collision that defined the Pacific Air War. One side worshipped the duel, the other built a machine to end it. And beneath that clash was the deeper shift, the one that mirrored the entire war. Japan believed in the power of individual skill. America believed in the power of systems, training, production, and technology. The Zero was the last knight's sword. The P-38 was the first industrial missile. By 1943, the myths that once dominated the Pacific were dying in fire and contrails. For every Zero that caught a lightning in a turning circle, 10 more fell trying. The samurai of the sky was still dangerous. But the world had changed, and in that world, myth moved slower than math. The lightning wasn't just faster in the air, it was faster in evolution. It had come to prove a brutal truth. Speed doesn't care about honor, it only cares about physics. And in the skies over Bougainville, physics was about to decide who would rule the Pacific. The P-38 and the Zero were never meant to fight each other. They came from opposite sides of the planet, and opposite ways of thinking about war. In Japan, the A6M Zero was born from desperation disguised as ambition. In 1937, the Imperial Navy needed a carrier fighter that could fly farther, climb faster, and outmaneuver every enemy in Asia. The Japanese aircraft industry was small, its resources limited. The answer came from a young engineer named Jiro Horikoshi, a man who believed perfection was achieved not by adding, but by removing. He designed a fighter that weighed less than 2 tons, nearly 40% lighter than its American counterparts. Every ounce of armor, every redundant system, every unnecessary brace was stripped away. The fuel tanks were unprotected. The cockpit was paper-thin. Even the paint was kept minimal to save weight. The result was astonishing. The Zero could outclimb and outturn anything in the sky. It could fly 1,500 miles without refueling, a distance unheard of in 1940. It was, in the words of one admiral, a sword with wings. That sword cut deep. Over China, it slaughtered Soviet-built fighters. At Pearl Harbor, it dominated the skies. In the Philippines and Singapore, Allied air power evaporated. The world mistook fragility for finesse. To Japan, the Zero was not just a weapon. It was a philosophy. Lightness as purity. Speed as honor. Pilots were expected to merge with their machines, to die, if necessary, in perfect unity. Across the Pacific, in Burbank, California, the Lockheed Corporation had a very different vision. In 1937, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a requirement for a long-range, high-altitude interceptor capable of over 360 mph, a radical idea for its time. A 26-year-old engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson took that challenge personally. He didn't build a sword. He built a machine for a new kind of war. Johnson's answer was the P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine, twin-boom fighter with a central nacelle for the cockpit and weapons. It looked alien, even to other pilots. Everything about it was designed by mathematics. The twin Allison V-1710 engines gave it redundancy. One could fail, and it would still fly. The turbo superchargers allowed it to climb to 40,000 feet, beyond the reach of most enemy fighters. Its nose-mounted guns were aligned for precision at 400 yards, all rounds converging on a single point of destruction. It wasn't nimble. It wasn't graceful. It didn't have to be. It was built to dominate by energy and endurance. While the Zero's designer worshipped simplicity, Johnson worshipped systems. Where the Zero relied on the courage of its pilot, the Lightning relied on the intelligence of its engineering. Where Japan trusted its warrior code, America trusted its assembly line. By the time both planes met over the Solomons in 1943, they represented more than machines. They represented two civilizations running out of illusions. The Japanese Empire had built its military on the myth of the decisive duel, the idea that wars were won by individual mastery. The Zero fit that perfectly. A one-man instrument of precision, built for the ultimate moment of glory. The United States had built its war machine on the math of production. No weapon was sacred. Every design was a prototype for the next. The P-38 wasn't a symbol. It was a process. It took 4 times longer to build than a Zero, but the U.S. could afford it. Factories in California and Texas ran around the clock, turning out one Lightning every 2 hours. The Japanese, with limited aluminum and dwindling fuel, were handcrafting their aircraft like samurai blades. The Pacific War made those philosophies collide. Japan's approach, precision and sacrifice, worked beautifully when victory came fast. But by 1943, the tide of war demanded endurance. Every pilot lost was irreplaceable. Every aircraft shot down took months to rebuild. The Americans were losing, too, but they could replace everything: pilots, planes, fuel, even tactics. When Japan lost one ace, it lost experience. When America lost one, it gained data. Every P-38 mission came back with flight reports, performance graphs, fuel consumption logs. Every engagement was analyzed, improved, reapplied. By the time the Zero met the Lightning in large-scale combat, it was fighting not just pilots, but statistics. 2 machines, 2 nations, 2 ideas of perfection. The Zero represented the beauty of instinct. The Lightning represented the power of design. One was built for the heroic moment. The other was built for the long war. And as the Pacific campaign dragged on, one truth became inescapable. No matter how brilliant the pilot, you can't outturn physics. No matter how pure the spirit, you can't outrun a turbo supercharger. The age of the warrior was ending. The age of the engineer had begun. Every myth dies in data. And in 1943, the data was merciless. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero had ruled the early Pacific not through invincibility, but through imbalance. It traded every ounce of armor for agility, every drop of protection for range. The trade worked, until the numbers caught up. On paper, the differences between the Zero and the P-38 Lightning looked small. In reality, those numbers meant life or death. Speed: A6M Zero, 331 nmpr at altitude. P-38J Lightning, 420 m/r at altitude. That's a 27% speed advantage, the difference between choosing a fight and surviving one. Climb rate: nearly identical at low altitude, but the Lightning held power at 30,000 feet, where the Zero gasped for oxygen. Its superchargers let it breathe thin air. Above 25,000 feet, the Zero was blind and sluggish, a bird trapped in the wrong sky. Dive limit: the Zero's light frame disintegrated past 350 mph. The P-38 could dive to 480 mph before compressibility set in. That gap, 130 mph, was the difference between tactics and physics. When a P-38 pilot was losing a fight, he didn't need luck or maneuver. He simply pushed the nose down. The Zero couldn't follow without tearing itself apart. Japanese pilots tried anyway. Many never came back. The Zero's wing loading, 22 pounds per square foot, made it beautiful in a dogfight, but brittle under stress. The Lightning's nearly double gave it strength for maneuvers the Zero could not survive. Then there was firepower. A6M Zero, 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons with limited ammo. P-38 Lightning, 1 20mm cannon and 4.50 caliber machine guns, nose-mounted, perfectly converged. When the P-38 fired, all 5 barrels struck the same point 400 yards away. A single burst could shred a Zero in half a second. Pilots called it the saw. Even if a Zero struck first, it often didn't matter. Its rounds peppered the Lightning's armor, but the self-sealing tanks and bulletproof canopy absorbed the punishment. The Lightning could take hits and climb away. The Zero could not. One spark, one tracer round, one drop of burning fuel, and the myth vanished in a sheet of fire. By late 1943, U.S. pilots had the math down cold. If you turn with a Zero, one said, you die. But if you keep your speed, he dies tired. The Zero's only advantage was turn radius, 680 feet to the P-38's 1,100. That mattered at 200 jas or not 400. The war had outgrown those speeds. The Pacific was no longer a dance of spirals and circles. It was a 3-dimensional chessboard measured in energy and velocity. The P-38's twin turbochargers meant that even at full throttle, both engines performed symmetrically. No torque, no roll imbalance. That stability allowed vertical fighting: climb, dive, fire, escape. For Japanese pilots trained in the art of the dogfight, it was disorienting. The Americans no longer stayed to play. They struck and vanished like lightning, which was exactly why Lockheed named it that. The numbers extended beyond flight performance. Range: 0, 1,100 miles under ideal conditions. P-38, 1,300 miles on internal fuel, over 2,200 with drop tanks. That meant one thing: reach. The Lightning could fly from Guadalcanal to Bougainville and back, 600 miles each way, something no other Allied fighter could do in 1943. It turned every Japanese base into a potential target and every Zero into a defensive weapon. While Japan still relied on short-range raids, the Americans were building a grid of leapfrogging airfields across the Pacific. Each one extended the Lightning's hunting ground. It wasn't courage that broke the Zero's dominance. It was logistics measured in miles per gallon. For every Zero that reached combat range, a P-38 could escort bombers, engage, and still have fuel to loiter or return. For every Zero that pushed too far, the Pacific swallowed it whole. By the end of 1943, Japan's ace advantage, the men who once terrorized the skies over China and Pearl Harbor, was shrinking fast. Japanese pilot training time, 1941, 700 hours. Japanese pilot training time, 1943, 300 hours. American pilot training time, in 1943, 600 hours and increasing. It wasn't just a contest of wings, it was a contest of hours, fuel, and endurance. Every engagement was a math problem disguised as combat. Who had more speed? Who had more altitude? Who had more time before the fuel gauge hit zero? In all three, the Lightning won. The Zero was still dangerous. In skilled hands, it could outturn anything that flew. But every advantage it had required a fight on its own terms. The Americans simply refused to give it one. The old age of agility had given way to the new age of energy. And in the Pacific, energy meant everything, because the ocean was infinite, and only the fast survived infinity. April 18, 1943. Guadalcanal Airstrip, 0700 hours. The jungle air is already thick and shimmering with heat. 16 P-38 Lightnings sit in two lines, each one loaded with fuel tanks and ammo. The mission briefing has been short, the tone absolute. The order is clear, unprecedented, and top secret. Intercept and kill Admiral Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the man who planned Pearl Harbor. The U.S. had broken Japan's naval code. Intercepted messages revealed Yamamoto's flight plan: departing Rabaul at 6 o'clock a.m., arriving at Bougainville at 9:45. His escort, 6 Zeros. His aircraft, 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. The flight distance? Over 600 miles one way. No Allied fighter had ever flown that far in the Pacific and returned. Except the P-38, the men of the 339th Fighter Squadron, part of the 347th Fighter Group, volunteered without hesitation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about precision, a chance to show what speed, coordination, and data could do. Major John W. Mitchell led the mission. His plan was pure geometry. The Lightnings would fly a 435-mile leg at 50 feet above the ocean, below radar detection, then climb to 18,000 feet at the interception point, exactly 1 minute before Yamamoto arrived. The navigation had to be perfect. 1 degree off, and they'd miss the target entirely. The pilots carried stopwatches. Every minute mattered. Every gallon of fuel was measured. At 7:25 a.m., the engine started, 16 twin Allisons roaring in synchronization. The noise rolled through the palm trees like thunder. Takeoff. The formation formed into 4 flights of 4, skimming the waves so low that salt spray streaked the windshields. At that height, the horizon was their compass. For 2.5 hours, they flew in silence, 1,500 miles of Pacific sky reduced to a single goal. At 9:34 a.m., Mitchell's lead navigator looked at his watch. 30 seconds to climb. Climb power. The Lightnings rose from sea level in perfect unison, engines straining. The jungle canopy of Bougainville filled the horizon. At 9:44 a.m., they saw them. 2 twin-engine Betty bombers, green camouflaged, glinting in the sunlight, escorted by 6 Zeros flying above and behind. Mitchell's voice was calm. All flights, go. The Lightnings split into 2 groups. The first, 4 fighters, dove straight toward the bombers. The rest climbed to engage the escorting Zeros. Zero pilots shouted warnings over the radio. Too late, Lieutenant Rex Barber closed on the lead bomber, Yamamoto's aircraft. He fired a short burst, cannon and machine guns converging on the left engine. Flames erupted instantly. The bomber rolled, nose down, trailing black smoke. Barber's second pass tore through the fuselage. The left wing snapped. The plane spiraled into the jungle. Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was dead before he hit the ground. The second bomber tried to dive for the coast. Lieutenant Tom Lanphier cut across its path, raking it with 20mm fire. It exploded mid-air. The escorting Zeros dove in fury. But the Lightnings were already breaking off, diving for the ocean, engines roaring. 1 P-38, Lieutenant Ray Hines, didn't make it back. Hit by a Zero, last seen trailing smoke. 15 returned. Back at Guadalcanal, the pilots landed in silence. They didn't cheer. They didn't boast. They had just traveled farther, flown faster, and executed more precisely than any fighter squadron in history. The news of Yamamoto's death spread like shockwaves through both militaries. In Japan, disbelief. Their most brilliant strategist gone, killed in the sky by what they once dismissed as clumsy American machines. In America, quiet satisfaction. Operation Vengeance was more than an assassination, it was a demonstration, the moment when the myth of the Zero met the mathematics of the Lightning. A mission planned through cryptanalysis, executed through engineering, and carried out by pilots who trusted instruments over instinct. For Japan, it was personal, the loss of a hero. For America, it was industrial, the victory of systems. Every number mattered that day. Distance flown, 1,000+ miles. Enemy aircraft destroyed. 2 bombers, 2 Zeros. Allied losses, 1 P-38. Precision through speed. Execution through planning. Victory through numbers. The death of Yamamoto marked the death of the old world, a world where courage and intuition ruled the sky. The new world belonged to those who could turn information into interception. The Zero could still outturn anything, but it couldn't outthink the Lightning. By mid-1943, the Zero's legend was collapsing under its own weight. What had begun as the most feared fighter in the Pacific was now a burning constant in the sky, silver fragments tumbling into blue water. The transition was brutal, mathematical, and inevitable. Japan's entire air doctrine had been built on the turning fight, the intimate, almost romantic notion of battle as a duel between masters. But the Pacific was not a dueling ground. It was an ocean of attrition. Every Zero destroyed took a veteran with it, and Japan was running out of both. The P-38 didn't just outperform the Zero. It exposed the flaw in Japan's entire concept of air power, reliance on the irreplaceable. The Imperial Navy had entered the war with some of the finest pilots in the world. Men like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Tetsuzo Iwamoto, each with hundreds of hours in the cockpit before their first combat mission. But as the war expanded, the empire demanded more pilots than it could train. By 1943, Japan's training schools were desperate. Aviation fuel was scarce, aircraft even scarcer. Cadets were getting less than 100 hours of flight time before combat, many flying obsolete planes. Their instructors were dead or exhausted. The United States faced the same losses, but not the same limits. For every pilot Japan graduated, America produced 8. For every aircraft Japan built, America built 15. The math was no longer a duel, it was an avalanche. The Lightning's success wasn't just speed or firepower, it was the system behind it. Fuel depots, maintenance chains, spare parts, standardized training, and constant upgrades. If a P-38 squadron lost 4 aircraft in a day, it had 6 replacements by the weekend. If a Zero squadron lost 4, it ceased to exist. And the tactical evolution was merciless. Early in the war, Japanese pilots mocked Americans for refusing to dogfight properly. They called them clumsy, undisciplined, cowardly, pilots who hit once and ran. By 1943, those same tactics were annihilating them. The Americans had learned a new math of survival. Altitude plus speed equals control. They fought in vertical space, not horizontal turns. They struck from above, using energy advantage, not grace. The Zero couldn't follow because it couldn't dive fast enough, couldn't climb long enough, and couldn't absorb damage when caught. At high speeds, its control surfaces stiffened, its thin wings flexed. A single 20mm hit to its unarmored fuel tank turned the cockpit into an inferno. Japan's best pilots, the ones who had survived China, Coral Sea, and Midway, were dying at a rate that no nation could sustain. By late 1943, the average Japanese fighter pilot in the South Pacific had less than 150 hours total flight time. The average American P-38 pilot had over 400, including formation, navigation, and high-altitude gunnery. Every American pilot shot down over the sea triggered a search and rescue mission. Every Japanese pilot shot down vanished into the Pacific. The war of courage had become a war of endurance. Even the factories told the story. P-38 production, 1943. 3,700 aircraft. Zero production, 1943. 1,800, and half lacked proper radios or gun sights due to shortages. Japan's industry was starving. The U.S. could build an entire wing of P-38s faster than Japan could replace one shattered air group. The numbers grew colder still. By 1944, the kill ratio between U.S. fighters, mainly P-38s and later F-6Fs, and Japanese Zeros exceeded 11.1 in New Guinea and the Solomons. Each month, the average skill level of surviving Japanese pilots dropped further. By the time of the Philippines campaign, the Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, had become a flying coffin for teenagers. The myth had become its own trap. The Japanese had built the perfect plane for short wars, lightweight, deadly, and dependent on mastery. But modern war was no longer about mastery. It was about multiplication. The Zero's perfection was static. The Lightning's imperfection was evolving. Lockheed engineers in California received field reports weekly. Every note, every problem, every combat story became an improvement. Turbochargers were modified, cooling systems refined, controls adjusted for compressibility. Each batch was slightly better than the last. Meanwhile, the Zero remained nearly unchanged. Japan's lack of industrial adaptability turned pride into paralysis. The result was mechanical Darwinism, one design evolving, the other extinct. By the end of 1943, the Pacific Air War had changed shape completely. Dogfights were no longer about who could turn tighter, but who could manage energy, altitude, and distance. In that new sky, the Zero was obsolete. Japan tried to adapt, introducing the A6M variant with thicker skin and higher speed, but it was too late. Every gain cost range and climb. Every fix came at the price of the original design's only strength. As the Zero fell from dominance, Japanese morale followed. The aces were gone. The replacements were dying faster than they could learn names. For the Americans, the war was no longer about survival. It was about execution. When the Lightning's turbochargers screamed at full throttle, they didn't just carry pilots into battle, they carried the industrial weight of a nation that had learned how to turn data into dominance. The turning war was over. The Zero had ruled an age of instinct. The P-38 had created an age of information. And over the endless Pacific, the sky that once belonged to the few now belonged to the fast. September 1943. New Guinea. Dawn. The airfield at Dobadura sits in a thin mist, the jungle behind it dripping from a night of rain. Mechanics tighten bolts, check turbochargers, wipe condensation from gun barrels. Beside the runway, a pilot in his early 20s leans against the wing of a P-38J smoking. His name is Major Thomas B. McGuire, the man who would soon become America's second highest scoring ace of the war. The briefing is short. Japanese fighters have been spotted over Wewak, protecting convoys resupplying the Tainan Air Group, the legendary Zero unit that had once dominated the Pacific. The 475th Fighter Group will strike first, cover the bombers, and cut down anything that climbs. At 0600, the engines start. Twin Allisons growl through the fog, shaking the palm trees. The smell of oil and wet grass fills the air. McGuire checks his instruments, slides the canopy closed, and nods to his wingman, Lieutenant Charles McDonald. "Let's go hunting." The squadron takes off in pairs, the runway vanishing beneath them. Within minutes, the P-38s climb above the clouds, sun flashing off their silver booms. They form into a wide arc, 15 Lightnings in a staggered V climbing toward 26,000 feet. On the radio, McGuire's voice is calm. "Remember, don't turn with them. Hit, climb and roll." It's the new gospel of air combat, drilled into every Lightning pilot. At 0800, radar contact from the coast. A flight of Zeros is inbound, 25 strong, escorting Ki-61 Tonys. The Japanese formation is tight, disciplined, the pilots confident. They don't know that the Americans have been watching them for half an hour. The 475th dives first. Out of the sun, the Lightning scream downward at over 400 rupiah. Sunlight flashes on canopies. Tracers streak white against blue. The first pass is devastating. 4 Zeros destroyed before the Japanese even scatter. The survivors pull into defensive spirals, trying to drag the Americans into horizontal turns. But McGuire's men refuse. They climb vertically, roll inverted, dive again. Each dive gains energy. Each pass bleeds the enemy dry. The radio fills with clipped voices. "Splash 1. 2, burning. Mac, break left. He's on you. Got him." Below, the Tainan Air Group disintegrates. The old Zero masters, men who once fought over the Coral Sea, are gone. The new pilots are green, brave, and doomed. They try to climb after the Lightnings, but their engines cough in thin air. Their light wings flutter in the turbulence. At 28,000 feet, McGuire rolls inverted and spots a Zero tailing his wingman. He dives through a vertical split S, pulls 5 Gs, and lines up his sights. The Zero fills his gun sight for less than half a second. 5 barrels blaze. Pieces of the Japanese plane scatter like leaves. It vanishes into the jungle canopy below. "Another one smoking," he reports. His tone doesn't change. In 20 minutes, it's over. 25 enemy fighters destroyed, 2 Lightnings damaged, none lost. On the ground at Wewak, the Japanese commander, Captain Yoshiro Hashiguchi, watches from a trench as his airfield burns. When the survivors land, he sees horror in their eyes. The myth of the invincible Zero has died, and its funeral is happening in real time. In Tokyo, the loss reports are softened for morale. Strong resistance encountered. But the truth is clear. The Tainan Air Group, once Japan's elite, is crippled. In the debriefing hut that evening, McGuire and MacDonald sit with their flight logs open. They don't celebrate, they just tally. Fuel expended, ammo used, enemy confirmed. The numbers are impersonal, but they are victory. Outside, the rain starts again. The mechanics push the scorched P-38s under canvas, already preparing them for tomorrow. In a corner, a young pilot scribbles in his diary. They came up fast, and they died faster. The Zeros could turn all they wanted, but they couldn't reach us. It wasn't courage that failed them. It was altitude. The next morning, the 475th flies again. Another radar report. Another intercept. Another 20 kills. By the end of the month, the group's kill ratio against the Tainan Air Group exceeds 10-1. The Pacific balance has flipped completely. Japan's elite has been erased in a single campaign, not through luck, but through repetition, the industrial rhythm of combat that the U.S. now owns. The Lightning's success is mechanical and human, precision multiplied by coordination. Every P-38 carries radios that let formations act as one. Every pilot trained to stay disciplined, resist instinct, follow the numbers. The Japanese fight as individuals. The Americans fight as a system, and systems always scale. At Dobodura, McGuire files his final report before nightfall. The typewriter keys hammer out a line that reads like prophecy. The Zero is finished. The faster plane wins. For Japan, it's not just the loss of aircraft. It's the loss of a belief that spirit could triumph over design. The new truth is colder. Physics has replaced heroism. And in that equation, the lightning reigns. November 2nd, 1943. The island fortress of Rabaul, New Britain. Japan's most powerful airbase in the South Pacific. Its harbor bristles with warships. Its hills lined with anti-aircraft guns. Its skies once considered impenetrable. Rabaul is the beating heart of Japan's Pacific defense, and the U.S. is about to punch straight through it. At dawn burst more than 100 American bombers, B-24 Liberators and B-25 Mitchells, thunder toward the target. Their escort, 50 P-38 Lightnings from the 347th and 475th Fighter Groups. The mission: cripple Rabaul's air power, destroy its Zero squadrons on the ground, and protect the invasion of Bougainville to the east. For the Japanese, this day begins in confidence. More than 150 fighters are stationed at Rabaul: Zeros, Kai-43 Oscars, Kai-61 Tonys, veterans and rookies alike. Their orders are simple: stop the bombers, no matter the cost. The alarm sirens wail. Engines cough to life across Rabaul's runways. Pilots sprint from tents to cockpits. The Zero wings unfold like white blades in the morning light. At 21,000 feet, the Lightnings approach, sunlight glinting off silver fuselages. Major MacDonald leads the first formation. McGuire flies high cover with 6 more Lightnings scanning the clouds. Radar stations below pick up the incoming raid. Japanese pilots climb fast, expecting lumbering bombers. Not fast, twin-boom fighters already waiting above them. The first engagement happens before the bombers even arrive. At 900 hours, over St. George's Channel, the two formations collide. The Zeros come in climbing, tight and disciplined, sunlight flashing off their wings. The Lightnings dive from the stratosphere in perfect synchronization. The sound is unlike anything the Japanese have ever heard. Twin turbochargers shrieking as 50 P-38s drop like meteors. Tracers slice the air. Explosions flower in white and orange. The battle lasts seconds at a time. No elegant spirals, no looping dogfights, just sudden violence. A Zero catches a lightning head-on, cannon shells ripping across its nose. The lightning peels away, trailing smoke, its pilot bailing out. Seconds later, the Zero explodes under 50 caliber fire from another lightning diving through at 6 o'clock. The American radio chatter is clipped, surgical. 2 bandits low. Break left, hit them in the climb. Splash confirmed. McGuire's group drops through 15,000 feet, hammering Zeros trying to intercept the bombers. He fires 1 short burst, 4 Chapter 50s, and a 20mm cannon. A Zero disintegrates. Another spins down trailing fuel vapor. McDonald's wingman, Lieutenant Jock Hennebree, banks hard, avoids a head-on pass and rolls inverted. He later says, "The Zeros couldn't stay with us. They were turning on instinct. We were fighting by geometry." At 10,000 feet, the bombers arrive. The Lightnings pivot instantly, diving to clear the way. Every time a Zero climbs toward a B-24, a P-38 meets it halfway. The sky turns into a moving sculpture of intersecting contrails, explosions, and arcs of tracer fire. From the ground, Japanese anti-aircraft crews fire blindly into the chaos, flak bursts blossoming black and red. At 10:10 a.m., the U.S. bombers release their payload. Rabaul's airfields erupt in fire. Dozens of parked aircraft ignite like matchsticks. Fuel dumps explode, turning the harbor into a boiling sea of smoke. In less than 15 minutes, Japan's most powerful forward air base is crippled. But the Zeros don't retreat. They keep coming, desperate to inflict damage to prove they can still fight. McGuire's fuel gauge drops toward empty. He dives low, weaving through black smoke pillars still firing. Behind him, a Zero dives from the sun. His wingman shouts, "Break right!" McGuire rolls, cuts throttle. The Zero overshoots. He fires once, short and clean. The Zero disintegrates. That was kill number 14. The Americans regroup at 3,000 feet, climbing back over the coast. The air behind them glows with burning fuel and falling debris. By 11 a.m., it's over. U.S. losses, 5 Lightnings, 8 bombers. Japanese losses, more than 100 aircraft, 50 destroyed in the air, another 50 on the ground. The kill ratio is staggering, 10-1. When word reaches Tokyo, the shock is seismic. The air fortress of Rabaul, the stronghold of the empire, has been gutted, not by bombers alone, but by the same American fighter that had been mocked 2 years earlier as too heavy to turn, too complicated to fight. Over the next week, Japan will attempt to reinforce Rabaul with fresh squadrons. Each time, the P-38s intercept them en route, shredding them before they reach the base. By December, the Imperial Navy evacuates Rabaul's remaining air units. The base that once symbolized Japan's reach is silent. In his diary, a Japanese pilot named Ensign Toshio Kuroda writes, "They came from nowhere. They climbed faster, dove faster, fired longer. We could not touch them. The air itself has turned against us." For the first time, Japanese high command admits what no propaganda can hide. The Zero is finished. In its place, Japan begins work on new fighters, heavier, faster, better armed, the Ki-84, the N-1K, the J-2M. But each new model is too late, starved of engines, fuel, and time. The battle over Rabaul doesn't just end a campaign, it ends an era. From that day forward, no Japanese fighter ever regained control of the Pacific sky. The duel that began in 1941, speed versus agility, armor versus spirit, is over. And the verdict belongs to velocity. By early 1944, the Pacific sky had changed color. The shimmering dominance once owned by the Zero was gone, replaced by contrails of aluminum, speed, and cold efficiency. The Zero still flew, but now it fought out of necessity, not confidence. The machine that once symbolized Japan's mastery of air combat had become a relic, chasing its own shadow. The myth had finally met the math. In the beginning, Japan's strategy was poetic: perfection through precision, victory through spirit. Its pilots believed in the duel, in the artistry of flight, in the elegance of the turn. Their enemies were to be outflown, not outproduced. But the Pacific War didn't care about poetry. It cared about logistics. The P-38 Lightning was the anti-myth. Heavy, complex, twin-engined, and unapologetically industrial. It didn't belong in a legend. It belonged in a blueprint. It wasn't designed for glory. It was designed for results. When they met in the sky, philosophy met physics. The Zero thrived on balance and instinct, the human element of flying on the edge. The Lightning thrived on calculation, a machine that worked best when its pilot stopped thinking like a swordsman and started thinking like a mathematician. And the math was merciless. At low speed, in the turn, the Zero was unbeatable. At high speed, in the climb and dive, it was doomed. The P-38 was faster by 90 mph, could fly twice as far, and survive hits that turned the Zero into fireballs. It wasn't just a better plane, it was a better strategy. Japan's reliance on elite pilots and irreplaceable machines created a fragile ecosystem. America's reliance on standardization and process created an unstoppable one. Each P-38 wasn't just an aircraft. It was a node in a vast industrial network. Fuel tankers, maintenance crews, radio towers, and production lines connected California to the South Pacific in an unbroken chain of speed and supply. The Zero fought with courage. The Lightning fought with infrastructure. And infrastructure always wins. By 1944, Japan's aircraft losses exceeded 10,000. Its veteran pilot corps, the men who had once carried the Empire's sky on their shoulders, was gone. The average combat pilot was 19 years old, barely trained, flying a machine he could not master. Meanwhile, America's pilots were veterans of thousands of sorties, trained in tactics the Japanese couldn't even simulate: high-altitude dives, long-range navigation, coordinated formation assaults. The war's center of gravity had shifted from skill to system. It wasn't that the Zero was bad, it was that the world around it had changed. A fighter born in 1940 to dominate colonial skies couldn't survive in a world defined by radar, turbochargers, and transoceanic logistics. Japan had built the perfect plane for the wrong war. And perfection, in modern combat, dies faster than adaptation. The duel between the P-38 and the Zero was the Pacific in miniature, a nation of artisans against a nation of engineers. One side crafted beauty by hand, the other built precision by mass. The Zero embodied the idea that courage could overcome odds. The P-38 embodied the idea that technology could eliminate them. Over time, courage ran out. Technology did not. The men who flew the Lightnings, McGuire, McDonald, Lanphier, Barber, never saw themselves as mythic. They were operators of a process, extensions of a machine designed to learn, improve, and repeat. They didn't win because they were better men. They won because they flew inside a better equation. And that equation would define the rest of the century. The Pacific sky became the laboratory where air power evolved, where human valor was first fused with computation, coordination, and speed. The Zero's fall wasn't just Japan's loss, it was the end of an era, the last stand of instinct against data. When the wreckage settled, the lessons were carved into the Pacific itself. Speed outruns bravery. Altitude outlasts agility. Systems outfight symbols. The myth of the Zero didn't die in a single battle. It eroded one mission at a time, each P-38 sortie rewriting the rules of the air war until there were no samurai left. only survivors. By 1945, the Pacific no longer belonged to the daring, it belonged to the fast. And speed had no mercy for myths. By the end of 1944, the Pacific sky no longer echoed with the high-pitched whine of Zero engines. The once proud symbol of Japanese supremacy had become the sound of defeat, thin, desperate, and fleeting. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin-engine roar, had turned that sky into an American domain. From Guadalcanal to the Philippines, from Rabaul to Okinawa, its silver wings carried a single message: speed rules the future. The P-38 had done more than outfly an enemy. It had rewritten the logic of air power. Every battle, every kill, every mission proved the same equation: altitude plus velocity equals survival. It was no longer about who could turn tighter. It was about who could think faster, climb higher, and adapt sooner. The Lightning proved that victory in the air was no longer the realm of heroes but of systems. A network of men, machines, and mathematics that learned with every sortie. And with that, the old world of aerial combat, the duels, the chivalry, the dogfights fought by feel, was gone forever. In its place came the age of acceleration. The same engineers who built the P-38 were already working on something new: engines without pistons, thrust without propellers, aircraft that would no longer fly through the air but burn it. The jet age was stirring. In Germany, the Ma-162, the world's first operational jet fighter, was already streaking over Europe, leaving piston aircraft in its wake. In Britain, Frank Whittle's engines promised the next leap. And in America, Lockheed and North American engineers stared at blueprints that would make even the Lightning look slow. The race for the future had begun before the old war was even over. The lessons of the Lightning would become its legacy: redundancy, endurance, integration. These were not just traits of one plane, they were the DNA of the next generation. For the men who flew it, the Lightning was both a weapon and a warning. They had seen how technology could erase entire philosophies in a single year, how myth could vanish in the shadow of a new machine. McGuire and MacDonald would go on to fight into 1945. Both aces, both legends. But even as they scored kills over Luzon and Leyte, they knew the sky they ruled was already changing beneath them. The future was screaming toward them, faster, louder, colder. The next war in the air would not be won by piston engines, nor by courage alone. It would be won by thrust, data, and the speed of light itself. The Zero had been the last knight. The P-38 had been the first machine of modern war, and soon a new contender would rise to decide the ultimate equation, when jets met propellers and the sky became fire.